just say he knows as much about the Center for Tobacco Products and the rules and regulations as their staff. Let's just say, because that says a lot. So I got to know him a little bit this morning too. He didn't always want to be a tobacco regulatory policy, legal public health expert. So he grew up actually in Fargo, North Dakota, and got his bachelor's at Augsburg College. I assume it's a liberal art college, right?
Yes.
Okay. In Minnesota, sociology. I'm looking at CV, so that explains a lot. And then he went to the finance area for a little bit and got out, and good for us, right? So then he went to law school at the William Mitchell College of Law, which is now called Mitchell-Hennepin College of Law. And so, and he's been there ever since as part of their team of attorneys who work for the Public Health Law Center. It's the best resource in the country for this type of work, trying to educate folks about FDA regulatory activities, working with local policy folks, the community, researchers, and he actually has a biosketch too, an NIH biosketch. So that's pretty cool. And so he's actually a consultant on some people we know's grants, but I think he's gonna do less of that, because when I saw it, I'm like, oh, I'd love to have him as a consultant on my grant. So, but anyway, so he knows the research field, and I'll let him do more, but really happy to have Desmond.
Thank you, Adam. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Hopefully everybody on the phone can hear me as well. Yeah, so I'm here to primarily talk about FDA regulation of tobacco products. There's been a lot of news. I'm sure you're all well aware, and decoding what you should care about and what you shouldn't care about and what has an impact and what doesn't have an impact is challenging. So hopefully I will do some decoding, and we'll leave plenty of time for discussion of all of the super interesting stuff that you all are working on too. So as I said, I'm at the Public Health Law Center. This picture is already outdated. We've got several people. We actually have 15 attorneys who are working on tobacco control, and we have 4 attorneys working on healthy eating, active living, city planning, other sort of public health issues that get to chronic disease prevention, which is our organizational focus. And we're hiring 4 more attorneys right now. So if you know any attorneys who want to get into tobacco control, send them my way. And everything that we do is now very focused on health equity. I didn't use the slide with the people with the bikes or the people looking for the fence. If anybody has a good 30-second elevator speech on health equity, I'd love to borrow it. But I will just say that so that all of the policy issues that we work on, we are trying to ensure that the people who are disadvantaged the most by the status quo are the people who benefit the most from policy change. So, and that trickles down all the way to the local level and all the way up to the federal policy. We provide what we call legal technical assistance, which is a lot of different things. We have lots of trainings and webinars, tons of publications on our website if you've been there. We only do there are only a couple things that we specifically don't do that you probably would normally associate with lawyers who are working in public policy. We don't do direct representation, so I don't actually go to court and argue before judges, thankfully. And we actually don't lobby according to the federal definition, which is engagement with the legislative branch, either at the state level or the federal level. We do work on FDA policy, but that is not technically lobbying, so we're allowed to do that. But like I said, we have lots of legal resources available on our website, and the bulk of what we do is actually just to answer individual questions. I've been doing today, hopefully a decent job on the spot. But if people have questions in the future, email me, call me, send me a direct message on Twitter, whatever works best for you. Because we're here to help out anybody who's doing tobacco control policy work, who's on the public health side. We do get calls and emails from industry occasionally. I want to open a hookah bar. What am I supposed to do? Paperwork? No, wrong place. I'm sorry. Okay, so this is just sort of broadly what I want to talk about. Obviously, we want to enough about FDA regulation, and the most salient issues are related to e-cigarette regulation. Before I do that, I'm going to ground us in some information on the youth e-cigarette epidemic, and I feel weird talking about things like the National Youth Tobacco Survey and monitoring the future in front of a room full of people who know way more about it than I do, but it is a really good framing for what the FDA is doing. The FDA is a science-based regulatory agency, and so these are the information that they're looking at to make the decision, so it helps to start there, I think. So, you've all seen this. This is my favorite graph of all time. I was just talking to Jessica about this earlier. This is just such a good, it tells you everything you need to know with nothing extra. This is the 2018 National Youth Tobacco Survey data from MMWR. I know it's small in the back, but you've all seen this before too. But this is the data that got the Surgeon General and the Commissioner of the FDA to start using the word epidemic when it comes to youth use of e-cigarettes. So this was super important to really start the conversation that is still going on with respect to FDA regulation of e-cigarettes. And then obviously the 2019 data is out as well, and the CDC stopped using this graphic for some reason for 2019, and I'm really bummed out. But so I just added to it without their permission, but I'm sure they'll forgive me. So obviously the big news is the giant increase again in e-cigarette usage, and that actually was the only product category for high school students that went up. So that's the sole driver of the increase in any tobacco product use. Also worth mentioning, decreases in a few product categories, particularly cigarettes, and then cigars and pipe tobacco were flat. So I like this graph so much that I decided to go a step further and reach back with the NYTS all the way to the beginning. And obviously, if you go back past 2011, the survey is not conducted every year. But this is high school rates, and this is any tobacco product, cigarettes, cigars, and e-cigarettes. And if you look at these long-term trends over 20 years rather than just, yeah.
Sorry, and it's current use, which is defined by?
I believe these are current use, yes. And
what does that mean?
And NYTS, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is use of, is it 30-day use? Any.
Okay, so it implies regular use. We're not just talking about people experimenting or trying.
Yeah, right? I mean,
better question. Yeah, it's any use on any of the
It's more dangerous in a sense than, because people will try things.
Right.
But it's more dangerous than that because it's implying, regular use.
Yes. Yeah. So when you look at, these are the three most popular tobacco products among high school students. So putting them together, you get the most significant drivers of any product use. And we should not ignore the fact that the usage of cigarettes has gone from more than 1 in 4 students per year to right around 5%, which actually in a lot of places in the world is an endgame target. So significant progress there. But unfortunately, cigars are now the most frequently used combustible product among high school students. And that's been true of a lot of demographic groups for a while, but now it's true in the aggregate. And obviously cigars often fill the gap when we focus policy just on cigarettes, which is why in the United States you can buy cigars in all sorts of flavors. But you can't with cigarettes. They can be advertised and marketed in ways that cigarettes can't as well. So, and also we haven't been making progress on adolescent cigar use really at all for the last 7 or so years. And then of course, e-cigarettes went from a product that was entirely non-existent to being the most popular product among high school youth. And so when you sort of put those 3 trends together, you get this sort of upside down curve for any tobacco product use. And this is really depressing to me in particular. So we're at 31.2% of high school students using any tobacco product, and you have to go back in time to 1999 or 2000 to find a rate higher than that. And for perspective, I was a high school student in 1999 and was one of the people taking that survey, and now I'm a mostly grown-up adult, practicing law, traveling to Southern California. I mean, that's how much we have erased in terms of nicotine addiction of high school students. So it's staggering. And obviously, e-cigarettes are the driver there. So I want to pivot to another data set, and maybe I get to be the expert on that that's in the room right now. I'm not sure. This is data. This is Nielsen data. This is the e-cigarette market. This is all channels, so it's convenience stores, pharmacy chains, grocery chains. Nielsen all channel doesn't collect vape shops and obviously doesn't track online sales because no one knows what's sold on the internet. But this still gives you a pretty good sense of what's happening in brick and mortar retail stores. So this blue area that you're going to see is monthly sales of e-cigarettes, and it is all brands combined. So this is the total market in most of those stores. You can see from November of 2013, you probably can't see the data, until July of 2016, the market is essentially flat. It is neither growing nor decreasing, right? I didn't put a trend line on here, but it's almost perfectly flat for this period of time. So this is pre-FDA regulation and pre-emergence of Juul. And obviously that's probably not where we're at anymore. So again, this is all brands combined through October of 2019, so just the end of last year. This data used to come to me through a monthly newsletter from Wells Fargo that they sent to just apparently whoever wanted to receive it. Some of you have probably seen it too. And unfortunately, the woman that runs their vices investing area, do cigarettes and alcohol and all kinds of stuff, she went to Goldman Sachs, and now they don't send the data anymore. So I'll have to find out another gray market to get Nielsen data. So not surprising to you, that increase in the market from $50 million a month to over $400 million a month in the span of just a couple of years is entirely driven by sales of Juul, which is the red area. And again, blue is all brands combined. So you can see the other brands continue to sell about the same amounts, increasing a little bit towards the end of 2019. But Juul comes out of nowhere and starts selling significantly more and growing the entire market. Yeah.
It's falling now.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit, but this I suspect was the peak, and I don't know if we've quite reached that level again, particularly because kids are moving away from Juul and towards other products, Puff Bar and others. So I want to take I should say also, this is where the other companies are at in comparison to Juul, and these are the other big tobacco companies, Reynolds, Lorillard, Altria when they used to sell e-cigarettes. You can't see this in the back. I mean, that's the point though, right? That nobody is touching Juul. And the points in this graph where you can see, little peaks where they sort of do better than the other companies is because they've introduced a Juul knockout. So the only way they can even outcompete the other companies is to mimic what Juul is doing. So this is the part where I take liberties with data, and you all forgive me. So I want to use the Nielsen data as a backdrop to bring back in use data. So we're going to pull back in the NYTS. Obviously, we have two different y-axes that are totally arbitrary. I understand. But we're just going to sort of look, the timeline-wise, we have the same x-axis. So I did this once with bars, and lines work better, but the bars allowed me to show where the survey was in the field, but we're roughly in the same spot. I mean, you guys are used to looking at graphs and charts all the time, so you'll get this. So we brought back in NYTS, and I'm using population estimates now instead of race. So middle school users on the bottom, and by the way, NYTS always grabs headlines with the high school usage rates. There are now over 1 million middle school students using e-cigarettes in the United States for the first time in 2019, which is absolutely staggering. So this is the part where I take liberty. So if you put those two numbers together, you sort of get an approximation of the youth market. I know that's not how the survey works. That's okay. So this is approximately youth And I am less familiar, but the National Health Interview Survey tracks adult use, and it does ask a different question to get to the current use. And again, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it asks if you use the product on most days or all days in the last 30 days. No?
No, it's
Totally
some
wrong.
days. No, it's just some days.
Some days, okay.
So you can be some days and be considered, if it doesn't say past 30 days.
Okay, so it's a
Like,
different
we
question.
now
That's
use
not
it
as
on
much.
some days, most days are every day. So some days are higher, current.
Okay. Thank you for clarification. So different question than NYTS, obviously. But it's my understanding that those two questions sort of get to the different patterns of use for youth that often escalate to the more adult pattern of use. At least that's the way it stuck in my brain when it was explained to me. So there's a lot going on here, but what I want to do is collapse the oldest three adult categories together. So this top black line is adults who are 25 and over. On the bottom purple line is what I'm going to call young adults, 18 to 24-year-olds. And this is, again, these are population estimates. So when I first started looking at this, before the 2018 data came out, I was struck by the fact that the further along in time we go, the fewer adults over 25 who were using e-cigarettes. There's not even that it's flat, there's a clear downward trajectory. Now, it did go up in 2018, and I think probably, without any support, I suspect it's like the 25 to 30-year-olds who are driving that increase. It's not like 65-year-olds who are picking up Juul. So this is the part where I really take liberties, because I'm going to put youth and young adults together, and it's two different surveys, and I understand that you're going to cringe and talk about my methods after I leave. But it's the only really way to do that is to use these two separate surveys. We don't have a tool that does this in the way that I wish we did. But I had several conversations about this today. There are definitely, in 2018 and 2019, young adults who initiated with Juul as youth, right? There are also young adults who Juul is targeting. They're susceptible to tobacco marketing. And that's a group that we also want to protect, right? We've passed Tobacco 21 laws, at the very least, to protect the 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. So I'll get back down off my soapbox. So the point is that youth and young adult use has a steady increase, well, 25 and over adults, steady decrease, and actually, out of happenstance in 2018, those two groups are approximately the same size. So that would mean, based on my unscientific method, that the median age of an e-cigarette user in 2018 was a 25-year-old. And those two groups at the population level are not the same size. In fact, adults 25 and over are more than twice the size of youth and young adults, which means that rate-wise, they're almost 3 times more. Youth and young adults, the rate is 3 times higher than the rate for people who are 25 and over. So, the 2019 NHIS data is not out yet. Well, it's not going to be out for a while. They do not publish that survey nearly as quickly as the NYTS. But even if you assumed that this is a sustainable increase for older adults over time, so this is just to show us where it might go. Again, we don't have the young adults because they're part of the NHIS, but we do have youth from the NYTS. So if you hold the number of young adults steady from 18 to 19, and then look at the increase of just youth, in 2019, we likely have significantly more people under the age of 25 using e-cigarettes than people over the age of 25. So epidemic is a very apt term for what we're experiencing, I think. And we'll pivot to FDA regulation at this point, because it's worth noting, again, we'll keep Juul sales on here, that all of the headline-grabbing things that the FDA has done have not changed this trajectory at all. So there are 2 points on this graph where Juul sales and thus the whole market decreased. One of them I will talk talk about it in a little bit more depth, but it's right here. After Juul pulled its mango, fruit, creme, and cucumber pods from brick and mortar stores, moved them just to the internet. I'm told that Juul had supply chain issues and simply could not get enough mint pods in stores to meet demand. And then once they sorted that out, a couple months later, obviously their sales went back up. And then obviously again the peak happened when the very first lung injury stuff was coming out of Valley. And if you recall, at that point we had no idea what the cause was, and I mean the whole e-cigarette market took a downturn because people were very afraid of ending up in the hospital. So we can pause here if there are questions or anything about my terrible attempt at science, but I will point out a lot of the regulatory information is available on our website. We have a couple of like blog posts on some of the most recent stuff, and we have publications and webinars and stuff. So if you want a refresher or you want to pass this on to somebody else, our website has a lot of good stuff in the FDA Tobacco Action Center. But otherwise, we can start talking e-cigarette regulation. Yeah.
Could you pause at that one that showed the timeline of
Yeah.
FDA actions?
Mm-hmm.
So it looks like Juul would take actions, and then FDA would send a warning.
Yeah.
Okay. Could you say
You might notice a pattern. So Juul discontinued flavors in stores. I don't actually have it because it happens right after this, but not long after, actually I think it was in October, Juul discontinued mint. And then of course, as you know, the FDA has also decided that they will prohibit mint flavored pods, which was really hard for Juul to comply with on day one. Yeah, I mean, there's politics at play, obviously. I talked to a few about this. They have to be more careful because now I don't know who's on the phone. We are in a climate where the administration is focused on deregulation, not regulation. And so the FDA can do things like target mint without fear of a company like Juul challenging it because they're already in compliance. So those are sort of easy baby steps. I don't suspect we would see the FDA, for example, target menthol in cigarettes at this point because of the potential for litigation and the pushback from the regulated entities that would cause. That hopefully will change in the future at some point, right? There are things that happened under the Obama administration that you would have never seen now, and actually the inverse is true as well. But the FDA is unfortunately not exempt from politics. They are in Silver Spring, that's not very far from Washington. And the head of the FDA obviously is appointed by the president. So, yes, politics is certainly a factor. I don't think I stepped on it too bad. Okay. Should we talk about FDA regulation?
We could define politics.
I'm a sociologist. I don't know. Okay, so actually, so regulation is a terrible word. Well, it's a boring word, first of all. I have vetoed all of our publications and webinars where someone tries to put the word regulation in it. It's not a good word. But it's an unfortunately ambiguous word, too. And I know some of you all have been to, like, local hearings and meetings and things where people are doing policy change, and you will definitely hear small business owners here in Southern California and all over the country come to say before the city council, we're FDA regulated. You don't need to do X, right? And yeah, they are FDA regulated. But opioids are also FDA regulated. We're in the middle of an epidemic of that. We regulate automobiles in the United States. We also regulate alcohol, but people still die in drunk driving crashes. The presence of regulation at all does not mean that something doesn't have problems, right? It's the details. So these are the details of FDA regulation of e-cigarettes. This is almost everything that the FDA does to date. There's a minimum legal sales age. It's now technically 21 in the statute. It's 18 in the regs, so I'm not updating regulation, or FDA pre-market review of tobacco products works like FDA pre-market review of drugs. You have to ask the agency for permission to sell the product at all. And you're not allowed to sell it at all until you have permission, right? So this makes the FDA the gatekeeper of the tobacco product marketplace. That's an important role, and one they're really not embracing. So this is the part where things get complicated, and we can definitely pause if this doesn't land, because sometimes I have to like walk through this several times very slowly with everyone I've ever talked about this, because there's a lot of weird details. FDA has pre-market review authority over new tobacco products, and a new product, according to the Family Smoking Prevention and Tobacco Control Act, which is the law that gives the FDA the authority, the Tobacco Control Act, a new product is one that came to the market after February 15th, 2007. Everything that was on the market then is actually grandfathered. You don't have to ask the FDA for permission. You can just keep selling the product. E-cigarettes on the market today were not on the market then. There may have been a precursor product on the market then, but it does not resemble Juul or any of the products that are available now. So that means every e-cigarette manufacturer today is selling their products illegally because none of them have received marketing authorization from the FDA. We'll circle back there in a second. So when the Tobacco Control Act was passed, it actually only gave the FDA immediate authority over cigarettes, cigarette tobacco, smokeless tobacco, and roll your own tobacco. And the law says that for every other product that is made or derived from tobacco and intended for human consumption, the FDA has to deem them to be subject to its authority. So that's e-cigarettes and cigars primarily. Now, the hitch here is that if the FDA doesn't regulate your product, they can't even accept the marketing application. Similar to if you filed a marketing application with them for a car. They don't regulate that. You can throw that away. We don't need that. So there's sort of a catch-22. Because the FDA doesn't regulate your product, and the moment they regulate it, you need permission to sell it, but you couldn't have asked for permission before day one. So the way that the law should, well, the letter of the law is that on the day the FDA takes authority over e-cigarettes, which was August 8th of 2016, every product should come off the market, manufacturers should file their applications, FDA should only authorize the ones that meet statutory standards, and then manufacturers should be able to sell them again. And that's the letter of the law. Now, even if we, big we government, wanted to do that, it would be pretty much an impossible enforcement task, even for an agency as big as the FDA. So the FDA used enforcement discretion, do not enforce the law as written, and to do things differently. And this will be the first of several timelines that you'll see. And unfortunately, this is the best way I can explain this. And this is the way that my brain works, so I apologize if this isn't the way that your brain works. So this was the FDA's original theory on how to implement pre-market review for e-cigarettes in particular. There are actually different pathways and different deadlines of all of the different timelines you'll see, but for simplicity, we'll just limit it to e-cigarettes so that you only have like a finite amount of things to think about. So manufacturers had to submit their marketing applications 2 years after the effective date of the deeming rule. For that time, you could keep selling your product, keep doing whatever you're doing. But in 2 years, your applications were due. And if you filed your application, that granted you 1 more year of marketing while your application is pending, while the FDA is reviewing it. But then, if we get 3 years past that effective date, which would have been August 8th, 2019, everything's off the market unless you've actually got permission. So unless the FDA has gotten all the way through the process and approved your product, you have to pull it. So there's a major incentive to file early and to get like the best application possible and be on top of the stack, right? And I was talking about this the way that I did because that doesn't ever actually get fully implemented. Because in 2017, Scott Gottlieb announced that the FDA had a new regulatory plan. And you heard about this because it made the news. This is where the FDA was going to reduce nicotine levels in smoking products, target flavors. What I could not get any reporter to write in any of the stories about this was that the FDA also completely overhauled pre-market review. And it did it in August, after this was announced in July. FDA still has not done pretty obvious right away, and that's that the deadline now to file an application goes to August of 2022. And there won't be a gap anymore, but when I was telling people this in 2017, what I told them was, that's right before the next midterm election. And the next presidential election definitely still felt ages out, so it felt like it was so far in the future, but, I mean, we've already passed half of that time at this point. But, 2022 is still a long ways out, but the other change I think is actually more important, and that's this. So long as you file here, you get to sell your product indefinitely. There's no point in time where you're required to have the actual marketing order to sell your product. So, what that means is, if I'm a manufacturer, my incentive is to file on August 7th of 2022. Because why would I file here? The FDA might actually review my application and pull my product from the market. I can guarantee I can keep selling it if I delay filing. And it also incentivizes you to file a crappy, incomplete application. Because how this process plays out is if you don't have enough information, the FDA doesn't say, we're rejected. What they do is send you a letter that says, you didn't give us enough information, you should send us more information. And then you send them a letter that says, here's a little bit more information. And they say, that's not quite enough information. We wanted a little bit more information about a different thing. And you can do that back and forth for, literally years. There are applications that were filed in 2011 that the FDA is still reviewing today.
It's likely the marketing and with the affirmative order that'll be delayed, that they'll change the due date.
We're going to get there in just a second.
Okay.
There's a little bit of space at the bottom here. It's for a third time. Spoilers. So, this was such a horrible policy that public health groups actually sued the FDA, which has only happened twice so far, which is 1/6 or 1/8 the number of times that the industry has sued the Center for Tobacco Products. And the legalness of it probably doesn't really matter, but what does matter is the public health groups won, which was amazing. And here's the new timeline. And this is imposed by a court, which means it will not be adjusted unless it is adjusted by the courts. You'll see that it adopts this model, which is awesome, and then pulls that as far back as reasonable to the present. So marketing applications for e-cigarettes, cigars, pipe tobacco, and water pipe tobacco, and a few weird dissolvables that weren't technically regulated before, are due on May 12th of this year. And then manufacturers have 1 year until May 12th of next year to get marketing authorization. So, the FDA is going to be inundated with paper starting in May, and reviewing those. We'll talk a little bit about some of the legal standards in a minute, but this is probably another good spot to pause and if there's questions. Yeah.
In comparison to any other product that's regulated, is this a reasonable timeline? I understand that it's better from your perspective because it's sooner.
Yeah.
I agree with you. But it seems arbitrary, and without any context of comparison, I don't know. Unless...
Yeah. There really, I don't think there's any point of comparison at all. I can't think of another industry where you suddenly impose regulation to a market that is coast to coast and global essentially, and has so many retail outlets. It's just I genuinely don't think there's another application in every vape shop that's out there, like mixing each flavor and nicotine concentration as an individual product that gets an individual application. A lot of those just fail because those people have no idea what's in their product. They cannot demonstrate that they're good for public health. So when the FDA gets those, it should just be an easy throw out. Try again with better information. And for the ones that have more information, obviously it's going to take them a little bit longer. But that's probably a fairly small subset of the like thousands of applications they're going to get. But time will tell, I suppose. That's a good question.
Desmond, are you going to talk about what the public health standard, populational, okay.
Yeah.
But like, because the timeline, right? And then the FDA has to make a decision, right? So you can talk a little bit about what are their guidelines to make a decision?
Yeah, I thought about including that here, and I didn't, but we will sort of I'll talk about the standard. And unfortunately, it's sort of broad, and there aren't a lot of details, but yeah, definitely that too. Anything else here? Otherwise, okay. So let's talk about flavors. So essentially, we just had to slog through all that to even talk about the flavor guidance, because the flavor guidance is all about pre-market review. If you don't grasp what's at stake and what's going on, then you just kind of get lost immediately. Which is why the reporting on this in the media is not terrific. But here's sort of the timeline, which you probably remember at least a few of these things. So the FDA is doing this by what's called a guidance document, which is like, here's how we're going to enforce the law, and it's a law that's already written down. And they issue guidance documents on varieties of things, and they're much more fluid than rules and regulations. So the draft version of this, which is not the final policy, but the proposed policy, came out last March. The FDA accepted comments. You may recall last September, the commissioner of the FDA, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the President, and the First Lady, she was there, I guess, because she found a jewel on Barron or something, apparently.
Planted that, good job.
Yeah.
The industry.
Very clever. They all sat down in the Oval Office and decided the FDA would clear the market, hashtag clear the market, of e-cigarette, flavored e-cigarette. And then things seemed normal. The guidance actually went to OMB, which is a new requirement under the Trump administration. Normally only major rules go to OMB, now guidance documents go as well. It went to OMB and it cleared OMB. And normally what happens then is it gets published in the Federal Register, which is when things become effective. It's a daily publication of every executive branch agency. And I cannot tell you how many reporters called me on November 5th and were puzzled why the guidance wasn't published. I don't know. I called the FDA, but that's how things normally go, and it didn't happen that way at all. Instead, there was a White House meeting. I used to put meeting in quotes, but people thought that was a little too political. There's videos on the internet, actually. It's very unproductive. There's public health groups and e-cigarette manufacturers, Secretary Azar, the President, and Mitt Romney.
Random.
Yeah. Romney actually came out looking really good, in my opinion. He said some pretty smart things. And so there was this meeting, and then nothing happened for a while again. Then we had the holidays, and then on the 7th of January, the FDA published the final version of the guidance. It didn't go back to OMB. I can't underscore enough how weird this was procedurally, and that should be a hint as to why you have a weird policy. Weird is generous, I think. So the proposed version of the guidance, the draft, you may remember, would have put restrictions on when and where you can sell products, and it was based on flavor categories. So there was tobacco, mint, you can attribute the draft to him.
Okay.
But yeah, so this is the draft from March, and then this is the final from this January. So all of these changes happened in the interim, and your guess is as good as mine who ordered what change for what reason. I've heard lots of stories about various parts of this, but it's all secondhand and nobody really knows. So 3 changes. The first one is actually good, and it's the FDA decided to not just like restrict where the products are sold, but actually just pull them from the market. They're just off, right? And then, so you're either off the market or you stay on the market. The other 2 are the ones that are, there's more to talk about. The first is that the flavor products are only now what the FDA calls cartridge-based e-cigarettes. We'll talk about that in a second. But the other one is that the FDA did decide to move mint into the flavor category, but exempted menthol. And so that's what we're going to talk about now. And this is going to look very familiar to a lot of you in the room. The FDA relies on 2 data sets in this guidance. This guidance has so much science in it. Normally guidances are like, I don't know, 5 to 10 pages, and it's a bunch of legal mumbo jumbo. This one has so much science and so many footnotes. Normally lawyers are like footnotes, but when the FDA scientists got in there, it's just like they tripled the amount of footnotes easily. So NYTS asks high school students their flavor preference, and you can tell these percentages add up to significantly more than 100. So it's like check all, right? There's probably a term for that, and you guys probably know it, but I don't. But mint and menthol are one category, and they're increasing from 2016 to 2019. And it's the only category, actually, that is consistently increasing. The FDA also relied on a study that, like I said, is going to be familiar to you folks. This is cool, by the way. Like, FDA citing your thing. I mean, like, that's as good as it gets, right? Even if they butcher it a little bit. Slightly. So, this is monitoring the future, like a special module. I don't know what I'm sure you have a name for it. And this is self-identified Juul users. See, this is the part where, like, I'm telling you guys about your thing. It feels a little weird. It's self-identified Juul users, and it's forced choice, right? You can only select one. But it doesn't ask preference. NYTS asks preference. This is flavor used most often, which is a different question. Preference is built into that, but also availability is built into that as well, and all sorts of other factors. What are my friends using? Mint and menthol are separate because they took all of Juul's actual individual flavors. And obviously there's a strong preference for mint and a secondary preference for mango. Very little menthol, which the FDA took to mean kids prefer mint, they don't prefer menthol, so we can exempt menthol because we have menthol cigarettes in the world, and adults probably use menthol. And that is not at all what this says, obviously. But you all know this as well. For most of the time that Juul was selling its products, from here until approximately here, it was selling all of these products both on its website and in retail stores. But, as we said before, Juul made a decision to put some of its products just on its website, to take them out of brick-and-mortar stores. And it starts about here. And that's when NYTS and Monitoring the Future were in the field. At this point, if you went to a brick-and-mortar store, if you bought a genuine Juul branded product, and there are like knockoffs and stuff too, there are 2 tobacco flavors, mint and menthol. And so, my favorite part of your study actually is on page 2, and I don't think most people got past page 1. But this is great because it's 2. You separate everything into 2 groups, right? So you have the kids who are using Juul less than 20 days, the kids who are using Juul at least 20 days. And the flavor preference is very different. You guys have this in a table, so I made it into a graph because I'm a very visual person, as you probably noticed already. Can you see? So this is 8th, 10th, 12th grade, using on fewer days, 8th, 10th, 12th grade using on more days. Can you see this line and this line, mint and mango? The older and more frequent a user you are, the more likely you are to have reported mint as the flavor you use most often, not necessarily the flavor you prefer. And in fact, if you take all So, this tells me that availability is at least a significant driver of what products kids are using, right? It is not just preference. But the FDA took that to mean preference, unfortunately. So, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it's also worth mentioning that because of an unfortunate court decision. Oh, no, go ahead.
If there was tobacco-only flavors that were available, would you use it?
I don't know. Good question. I would say.
Tell the FDA to do that and see what happens, yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, right, I don't, I know a lot of kids really like the nicotine buzz from Juul, but you have to wonder how many kids would have gotten that because they had to get past the fact that this tastes like garbage, right? Yeah, no, absolutely. So it is also worth noting that because of a bad court decision, changes to packaging and labeling are completely outside of the pre-market review process, unfortunately. So there is nothing, literally nothing, to stop Juul from changing mint to menthol, changing nothing about the formulation of the product, just the packaging, and probably skating right through this guidance. Now, they're probably not going to do that because they're under the microscope, but there are plenty of other companies that are. How many kids know the difference between mint and menthol? How many adults know the difference between mint and menthol? And, like, knowing what those two concepts mean is not the same thing as what's actually in the products, right? So, I suspect there will be companies that will take mint-flavored products and just call it menthol. And our friend, Commissioner Gottlieb, former Commissioner Gottlieb at this point, also suspected that's true, so let's take my word for it. He actually even speculated that they'll just rename products that are not necessarily tobacco to be tobacco flavored, which might sound crazy, but I don't know how crazy that actually is. There are companies that are desperate to keep making money, keep selling products. So, that's the mint-menthol debacle, according to me. But again, so the restriction on flavors only applies to cartridge-based e-cigarettes, and you have to unpack that a little bit. This is the weird process that leads to weird policy, weird beat generation. Yes.
Sorry, Desmond. So you're saying about like that the packaging like is not reviewed for the.
Correct.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
So like I don't know. So what you're saying is that there could be approval of like the product, but then like when they actually go out and put it like on the shelf, it can just have all sorts of whatever. It looks like the apple juice, right? They can do whatever they want.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, you probably step into the like illegal youth marketing stuff, so you probably shouldn't be quite that egregious. But yes, I mean, FDA is reviewing the stuff that's inside the package, and once that's authorized, you can take that and give it 3 different names and sell it in 3 different packages, and they're all one for the purpose of pre-market review, but to the consumer, they're 3.
Who reviews to see whether it's youth targeted marketing?
The FDA does.
FDA does.
Surveillance type stuff. I mean, they've taken the
Right,
apple juice type stuff.
Uh-huh.
They've done that a couple of times.
Okay.
I would be surprised if anybody is that dumb to keep doing that, but I mean, I'm sure there are some out there that are that dumb. I mean, if setting that issue aside, if you had like apple flavored e-liquid that was approved, yeah, you could take that and put it inside of the juice box. packaging were new, and they were sued by Philip Morris and Reynolds, and they won. And the FDA didn't actually appeal that at all, probably because they thought it might get worse, which was possible. But the end result of that is that the FDA is only reviewing the stuff that's on the inside. Packaging is separate. They do have authority to set up sort of a sideline pre-market review process for packaging. They just haven't done it. They would have First Amendment difficulties doing it, but it's not impossible. So they have prior approval authority for certain types of marketing. They have to actually set up a rule to do it. We just haven't done it. Okay. We'll try and get through this kind of quickly because this isn't like the most super fun thing. But so the guidance covers the FDA uses the term ENDS, and essentially it's anything that's delivering e-liquid that's been aerosoled. E-liquid has its own definition, which doesn't really matter. But so cartridge-based ENDS that uses a cartridge or pod, and so that doesn't really give you any information. But the FDA also tells you what cartridge or pod is, and that's something that's designed to fit within an ENDS. So, I mean, if you think about it, every e-cigarette has something that holds the liquid, and that apparently can't be a cartridge or pod. We don't know what those words mean because we're in this world, but there's nothing in this definition that really tells you anything. Any e-cigarette can fit into this definition. Everything has something that holds the liquid, and that part that holds the liquid is designed to fit within or operate within the pod. The definition is circular. It doesn't actually tell you anything. And if you didn't know, because of media reporting, what the FDA exempted, you probably would have no idea. But according to them, what's exempted is non-cartridge-based pods, which they say are sold in vape shops. So what they're exempting is tank mod systems. They don't say that explicitly, but their literature makes that clear. And then, bizarrely, absolutely bizarrely, there's a footnote in the definition that tells you that they also intend to exempt completely self-contained disposable products. So that if your product is either a tank mod system or disposable, it is out of other flavor realm and into the tobacco, mint, and menthol realm, despite the fact that it can be any flavor you want it to be, which is why Puff Bar is doing so well right now.
Can I ask you a question? I
Yes.
understand the rationale for the tank and mod system.
If you're going to ask me for the rationale for disposable, I don't have a good answer.
My question. I'm trying to understand what their rationale is. Like, why would they,
Honestly,
what product would they
just
be
be something. Because like the semi-disposables for us, even like we used to think of as like the but they just like behind and maybe anticipate this.
Isn't a lot of it just sloppy legal thinking, and they're not inclusive enough in their definitions, and then they miss it.
yeah, I mean, this wasn't,
just forgot
I don't think this was an oversight, because they had to specifically add this.
Yeah.
Honestly, my best guess is, I mean, if you imagine that this is regulatory inertia, Juul is, for whatever reason, doing everything that they can to force the FDA's hand to regulate them, right? They have been making headlines constantly for doing just stupid things, right? And so if you have this problem landed in your lap and you're forced to do something, this policy looks to me like it was crafted just to hit Juul and anybody else who's like remotely like Juul enough that you're also caught in the net. So we can exempt the stuff that's totally unlike it because it's tank mod stuff, or Juul doesn't sell these disposable, so we'll just throw those out too. That's what it feels like to me, but honestly, that is pure speculation.
Question, so where do Puff Bars fit into this?
They're disposable. Yeah.
So they're exempt from the flavor.
They're exempt from the
They can still be flavored.
Yes.
And they may be less expensive than combustible cigarettes in terms of
Yeah, they probably are. I mean, you don't
in terms
have to
of how long they'll last.
batteries.
And they have as much nicotine as a Juul.
Yeah.
So there's nothing,
It's the new.
there's nothing in these regulations that will eventually control Puff Bars.
Well, they are still, we'll get there in 1 second, but they still have to comply with the big pre-market review process, right? They still have to file their application in May. So that's resolved before the May 12th, 2021 deadline.
Right. So, I mean, yeah, this covers like 4 months, right? But, and just because, this is just covering right now, right? So, that means a flavored product, Juul, is, in theory, could get mango approved. This doesn't say, like, we'll never approve this.
Right.
It's just saying we're gonna try to take you off the market.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, and what does it mean for the, like, if you file by May for the PMTA, do you, does flavor, what am I trying to say? Flavor matter,
If you're subject to this guidance, so if Juul still
Yeah,
sold
right.
mango, they would have to pull it. But yes, they could apply for
or
it
the
still.
extra year, right?
Yeah.
So, but then do those people still, they don't get the extra year? Does it subsume, right? It's like, we're gonna pull Juul mango off the market, and then Juul says, well, we applied before May, so does that guidance not apply to us since we apply, you know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
they are still off the market. So,
Okay, got it.
I'll jump back, for a second. But, so this is effectively, these timelines are both happening right now. So if you are a flavored, other than tobacco menthol, cartridge-based e-cigarette, this is you. You are already off the market. You have to file and get permission to start selling again. So that's Juul, mango, cucumber, fruit crown, all of it. But for everybody else, this is where Puff Bar is. They still have a few more months. That strikes me as a company that might just fold at that point. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. They're just coming in from China. I don't know how much of a presence they have here in the U.S. other than they have massive distribution all of a sudden. But Puff Bar, every Tank Monsters, and essentially everyone else, they have a few more months. Did you have a question? And the other thing to talk about is that originally the FDA was going to also target flavored cigars. That would have been huge. It would have been just amazingly terrific. And then for some reason, in the final guidance, the FDA decided they're not going to do that. They think that the May 12th, 2020 deadline is good enough to deal with cigars. I will say with cigars, with many cigars, the bar will be lower for authorization because they will be able to utilize the substantial excellence process, not the PMTA process. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute if you have no idea what I'm talking about. But just to underscore this again, this is the data that exists in the world when the FDA is deciding to exempt cigars. They're now more popular than cigarettes among high school students. So, again, this is the two timelines. We have threaded the needle now where the flavored cartridge-based e-cigarettes are off the market, but everything else, we're still not quite to the filing deadline. I'm going to get through the last couple things fairly quickly because I'm sure there's more things to talk about. But Tobacco 21, so this is fairly discreet, so hopefully this will be smooth. As you've hopefully heard, the Tobacco 21 law was signed on the 20th of December last year. The law actually is effective on that date. There's a lot of confusion about this because the law also says that the FDA has to issue rules, gives the FDA a deadline. So the FDA is going to update its rules. The latest we could have an FDA rule in effect on Tobacco 21 would be September 15th of this year. And there was so much confusion actually that the FDA proactively did communication, which is, we were surprised to see this because they didn't actually have a rule, but they were telling people this is effective. There's a weird, it's not worth explaining why things played out so weirdly, but the effect of it is that the FDA's regulations still say 18. They have to update them to 21, so they won't actually be enforcing the Tobacco 21 law until their regulations are updated, and then they actually, because they enforce at the state level through subcontracts, they will have to update their regulations and update their enforcement contracts. So we could be 2021 before FDA enforcement is actually using 18, 19, 20-year-old decoys. They will continue to enforce with that there's no enforcement is not able to really enforce tobacco 21 yet. So the confusion is usually centered around how this interacts with state law. So in Minnesota, we have not yet passed tobacco 21 at the state level. Most of our communities have passed at the local level. But obviously, a sale to a 21-year-old is fine under state and federal law, and a sale to a 17-year-old is absolutely prohibited under both state and federal law. The nuance is what happens when there is a 20-year-old. And if you think about it, it's actually not super complicated. The retailer still violated federal law. They have not yet violated state law, but they did still violate federal law. So the moment tobacco 21 became effective, all retailers are now required to not sell to anyone who's under 21. This is true when you have something like a military exemption, which I believe you all still have here in California. So even if you have someone who is 20 with a military ID, while that is not a violation of state law, a sale to that person is still a violation of federal law. So there's some potentially confusing enforcement, and the FDA probably is going to have to do a lot better education for retailers. But
marijuana is illegal at the federal level, but legal at the state, so there's precedent for violating federal regulation from that perspective, except that they said we won't enforce it at the federal level. But,
yeah.
But other than that, I mean, it's the same kind of a thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is and it isn't. Actually, I got this question before, and so it's true that, I mean, similarly, you have that as a nuance, except that with tobacco, the federal government absolutely does intend to enforce the law. So it's not like marijuana where they're just like, we're not going to do that, and you can do your own thing. Here, tobacco 21 is the law of the land, and while the FDA isn't enforcing it right now, it will be enforcing it now. So if you're a retailer, it would be a good idea to be compliant. I mean, I suspect that if the FDA gets a lot of reports of retailers who are not compliant now, those retailers are probably going to be on top of the list.
So it's not that you have a policy, it's that whether you decide to enforce it or not.
Well, the statute says 21 and the regulations say 18, so they have to update the regulations to 21 also. Yeah. The reason that this is the case is that with this particular policy, probably what should have happened is Congress shouldn't have wrote it's illegal to sell to a 21-year-old in the statute and just said FDA update your regulations. Because actually the minimum legal sales age currently is only in the regulations. It was not in statute until this law. And so the law that the FDA enforces is in the regulations. So if Congress had just said update the regulations, tobacco 21 would not be the law of the land, but we wouldn't have mass confusion about this, and FDA would have the time to do a lot more education and talk to retailers and have a better plan. I don't think they were probably thrilled with this. It's not like the worst outcome. I mean, leaving it to FDA and not giving FDA a deadline would probably have been the worst way to implement the bar. So, I mean, we take the good with the bad, I suppose. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of state and local governments that are going to be now raising the minimum age also. We're getting a lot of questions like, well, should we wait for the FDA? No, because 21 is still the law of the land, even if the FDA's regs aren't. So, and then it's also easier to communicate with your retailers at a local level and help them understand local, state, and federal law. So I thought we would maybe look to the future a little bit. I mean, I've had a lot of questions today about what's going to happen, what should we know about. And obviously there's a lot of uncertainty, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be more, not less, litigation in the next 12 to 18 months. There are still a lot of cases that are challenging the FDA's deeming rule back from 2016. There's still quite a few challenges floating around. There are legal challenges to the FDA's judicially imposed deadline for pre-market review, which is bonkers. That's not how the judicial system is supposed to be. challenging, I can't remember if they were challenging warning labels, they were definitely challenging pre-market review and the modified risk provisions, several other things. There's another challenge from the Cigar Association of America. They've been focused on warning labels. So warning labels for cigars have been on hold for a while. And then they were just struck down for premium cigars not long ago also, but that will be appealed. And then there are a handful of other cases that were actually put on hold for a while that have just been restarted because of the decision in the computer also. But nothing that's significant, I mean, in terms of decisions. For the most part, the rule has been upheld. The one exception is warning labels for cigars. And I have a feeling that will eventually work itself out.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah.
A components and parts question. Have you heard of, puff crush? What's your thoughts on that? That should be regulated as a component,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it should, yes.
Is it going to be?
I'm glad that at least you asked that part of the question. I don't know what will happen. The other dynamic is that it was not on the market on August 8th of 2016. I don't know how hard I underscored that, but all those timelines only apply if your product was already on the market the minute the FDA started regulating. You can't introduce a new product in 2019 without marketing order.
What about like Puff Bar though?
Yeah,
That was on the market.
Straight up marketed illegally. FDA is on the phone, we should figure that out. I suspect that they are hoping to deal with it through the pre-market review process, which is dumb in my opinion. They should remove it from the market. Like, try to find any information anywhere on Puff Bar pre-2019. If you find something it does not exist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But with like Puff Crush, they're not going to send that in for pre-market review.
No, they probably won't. But FDA could still tell them, you might think you're not regulated, but you are a component or part of tobacco products. And you can file your application today, or we will start giving you civil monetary penalties. I think it's like $25,000 a day for every day you're selling products that are misbranded and adulterated tobacco products, which is what they would be. That's what should happen. I don't know if it will happen.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Like, unless
I think Puff Bar wants to be the next Jewel. That's certainly. I mean,
maybe
not just that like they want the market share, but they seem to like really want bad attention, and they're gonna get it. Yeah. What was your other question?
So the other thing we haven't talked about really are these like new nicotine pouches, like the Zen, Velo, on. Are those also going through pre-market review? And under what? Because they're not e-cigarettes, they're not cigars, they're not.
So those categories are sort of arbitrary. None of them are actually in statute. The FDA only makes FDA regulation essentially has 4 product categories. Cigarettes have significant marketing restrictions that have been in effect for a while. They have unique warning labels. Only the graphic warning rule is going to be applied to them. They have smokeless tobacco, which also have unique warning labels, and they have a lot of the same, maybe even all the same restrictions as cigarettes in terms of the legacy marketing restrictions. There are cigars, which have a particular definition, but cigars have their own set of warning labels. And then there's everything else.
Okay.
And it doesn't really matter what it is, because the FDA treats them all the same. They all have the benign, like, this product contains nicotine is non-addictive warning label, and then they don't do anything else differently. I mean, you saw the list of this is how the FDA regulates e-cigarettes. None of that's product specific, right? But they are still tobacco products. They contain nicotine that's derived from tobacco. So they're definitely tobacco products. They're definitely still subject to pre-market review. I'm pretty sure they were not on the market in 2016. I didn't see them. They maybe had like a very small like test market somewhere. That might be their only hook. The FDA hasn't figured out the distinction between commercial marketing and test marketing, in my opinion. But yeah, they will still have to go through the pre-market review process. I've got a lot of questions about their claim of tobacco free, which is probably probably a prohibited, modified, or risk claim, but I don't think the FDA is going to enforce that because of the First Amendment issues.
But they're probably not, I mean, they're not that likely to become very popular because of the topography of the intake. It's got to be, if it's orally absorbed, it's a 20-minute effect, and then it's the table effect as opposed to the spike. They had a product, the smokeless tobacco product. What were those sticks called?
Orbs strips and sticks.
Well, I mean, it was before, was it orbs? It was before, it was like in the 80s or 90s. And it never caught on, because people said, oh, you had to put 3 or 4 of them in your mouth. Same thing with Skull Bandits, and they're doing smokeless tobacco, never became very popular. So I can't see how these would become popular because of the, the nature of the kind of the intake, the delay. Unless
Are you saying that for puff?
less availability.
Or?
No, for the little,
Puffs.
no, like billows.
No, the pouches.
Little pouches.
I don't know, though, like, snooze is not total, I mean, in some places, I don't know. We'll see, yeah, but an interesting.
It is.
Yeah.
I have, one more, sorry, so many questions. Do they make available, so all these places that submit the pre-market reviews are, like, will we have a list of everybody that did so that we can turn around and say to FDA, like, these products didn't submit and they're, nice.
Should. I would, honestly, I'd be very surprised if they did make that available. So there was a chunk of cigarette, smokeless tobacco, marketing applications that were due in 2011 in order to get the benefit of indefinite marketing. And I had a FOIA request in for just the list, just the names, that I put in 2015, 2014. I can't remember. I just got the results last year, and it was not the complete list. They only gave me the ones that they had acted on. Yeah, actually, I was going to start sending my FOIA request birthday cards, but then they finally did. But it is the FDA's contention that the fact that a manufacturer filed a marketing application is what's called confidential, commercial, or financial information, which is exempt from FOIA, which is stupid, because those products are in stores right now. So the fact that they filed an application should be public information. Once they act on them, they do become public. Obviously, at that point, not letting you do. But the FDA also can, if it chooses to, commission the Tobacco Product Scientific Advisory Committee to review a pre-market tobacco product application. So they're required to do that for MRTP applications, but a manufacturer can request, or the FDA can decide to have a TIPSAC hearing on a PMTA, which should also create some sort of public process. You can't have even an advisory committee reviewing something and decide that that's not public. You have to make a public version of it for the file. So that would be the only case in which something would become public before the FDA backed up, unfortunately. Let's just, I don't know if it's worth going through all this stuff. I mean, you guys know that there was a proposed graphic warning rule. The deadline for the final rule is March 15th, so it should come out soon. It's actually at OMB right now. They've had a few meetings, mostly with cigarette manufacturers. You guys have seen the warnings, and they're good by U.S. standards. They're not as good, I think, by international standards, but we're early to the game, so we get what we get, I guess. And then, so we alluded to this earlier. So this is for a pre-market tobacco product application. There's a lot of language here, I know, but this is the standard that the FDA uses. But there's only like a couple of important parts. So when they're reviewing the application, they're reviewing what the applicant has given them. They're not, they can look at information that they also just know that exists in the world, right? But you're looking at the risks and benefits to the population as a whole, which includes users and non-users. And then you're taking into account existing users stopping and non-users starting. And really, that's kind of it. There's not a lot more detail there on what that language means. Obviously, that's super broad. I can tell you that of the applications the FDA has reviewed, familiar with the Public Health Standard, it's actually throughout the Tobacco Control Act. So this is the language that governs the FDA's establishment of product standards. So when the FDA acts on nicotine, it's looking at the exact same thing, the risks and the benefits to the whole population, users and non-users, and it's looking at initiation and cessation as well. So, the FDA really has to understand what that means because they use it for almost everything. And it's very deliberate that this standard is written at the population level. That is a significant distinction from drug and device regulation, which is focused on individual health, right? So in the tobacco product regulation, we're at the population level. And then, I don't know, just like final comment before for whatever questions you guys might have. There are lots of opportunities to engage with the FDA. I mean, you guys are in the C-Corps Center, so this is not like new to you. I would also encourage you all to think about the fact that the FDA is not your only audience when it comes to regulators, particularly right now when there's a lot of inertia at the federal government. State and local governments are where regulation's happening, and I mean, I know you are funded to do regulatory science for the FDA, and so there are some things that only FDA can do, like pre-market review reporting rules, but a lot of the stuff, sales restrictions, advertising and marketing restrictions, those are things that also happen at the state and local level too. So, just sort of have that in the back of your mind. And then, I don't know, when I talk to scientists, I always make a point of saying, like, you're all regulatory scientists, but I mean, I think you guys get that more than others, but I know, I feel like the last couple of years, tobacco control scientists are significantly more engaged, but I said earlier to someone, like, this is not, you're not like particle physicists